Hi everyone, welcome to the Simpsons Malt Spring Malting Barley Variety trial site here at Beale Farm on the Northumberland coast. Such a shame you can't be with us in person this year, but to try and make up for that, myself and my colleague David are going to have a walk along the variety plots here. David's going to comment on the agronomy and the growing season this year, and I'll chip in with a few comments on the varieties and where they currently sit in the marketplace. Okay, so we're starting with the purely distilling only varieties, and the first one that we come to is Sienna, which has been around a few years now, currently taking about 2% of the market share in Scotland. It's a bit of a niche variety. We've run with it for the last few years, but I think this could be the last year we'll be running with Sienna. Its main differentiation from a lot of the other varieties, it's a very big specific weight. I think that has given a few processing issues in the maltings. Agronomically, it's just starting to fall a little behind one or two of the newer varieties too.
You can see that in the head there, that it's going to produce a big spec weight barley in comparison to the others, which we'll see later on. It's got a really big bold grain.
Which in a poor year you'd think might be an advantage, but generally I think it has given a few problems. It's been a decent variety. It's popular on the farm, David. I think you'd agree with that.
Yeah, in certain areas I think that people have grown it and been quite happy with it, but it's probably never taken off the way some of the other ones have, possibly just due, like you say, to market pull on it.
That's right. So probably the last year we'll be looking at Sienna in the plots. Okay, and now into KWS Sassy, another distilling only variety. This one's currently taken around about 10% market share. That's 10% of the certified seed area and about 10% of the Scottish barley purchases. So it has found a bit of favour with particular maltsters and distillers. Agronomically, it's a bit flawed. It's the only barley variety full stop on the recommended list that's got a straw strength less than a 7, so it is a bit weak strawed, and it does brackle. It also was originally grown in the far north because it looked as if it was going to be quite early, and in fact its maturity score now is much the same as all the other varieties. But that said, it has a nice bold grain to it, and it seems to have carved a little niche in the market as a distilling only barley. I think it's probably gone as far as it's going to go. This will be about its maximum, but it's a nice enough variety all in, if we can look past its few agronomic weaknesses. Okay, so now we're into Firefoxx. This is a new variety, just got recommended, promoted onto the HDB recommended list last December. It's also a distilling only variety. It currently sits on the recommended list at an 107, which is for the North region, which is the equal highest yielding variety with Tungsten, Splendor and Diablo. There's 4 of them all on 107. So it's certainly got the yield. It looks quite interesting, this one. It's got a PSY probably similar to Laureate in micromalt so far. It appears to have a low beta-glucan, and an interesting point, it has had particularly low skinning levels the last 2 years, which could be an interesting concept, David.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a very topical thing with everybody skinning levels, and I think anything that you can get varietal, that's going to help that.
There's always been a suspicion that it isn't so much a varietal thing as a seasonal thing, but some varieties do seem more prone than others.
It's seasonal and mechanical, I think, as well. A lot more people are used now to, trying to manage the skinnings, and I think like the maltings, they'd always rather have a few awns on and have the skin left on than it thrashed that way. So I think, guidance to growers about mechanical harvesting is really helping with that as well.
So it's currently sitting at provisional for distilling, and this will be the year it goes into macro scale trials. So we are involved with that. We have a commercial crop of, it's very limited seed this year. I mean, there's only about 20 tonnes in the whole of the UK, so we've managed to get involved with about half of that. So there's about 60 acres on a purely commercial crop, and we have a 65 acres on a commercial dash seed crop. So there's literally going to be a few hundred tonnes of this coming in this harvest time to assess commercially in the maltings, but certainly I think it looks as if there could be some promise with this variety, and it's certainly worthy of further evaluation. Okay, so now we're into Concerto, fully approved brewing and distilling variety. Really, we're witnessing the end of an era here. It's been a fantastic variety and probably will be continue to be from a breeding perspective going forward. But this once market-leading variety is now almost finished. It was still 17% of the Scottish malt and barley purchases ex-harvest 19, but just to show how it's fallen, it's only 0.6% of the certified seed market in Scotland this year. And an alarming statistic, or an unusual statistic, there's not one single field of Concerto multiplication seed in the UK this year, other than a high-grade one with Lima grain. So really it is the end of the road for Concerto. I think we've got about 3,500 tonnes coming in this harvest, and going beyond that, I think it's obviously going to be extremely limited. So thanks Concerto, you've been a good one.
I think it was very noticeable this last 2 years as you got your varieties, which we're going to cover later, Laureate, Diablo, etc. They were just so much in the field, noticeably higher yielding, and I think the growers, as well as, I think like the malt says, it produces very well, but unfortunately the agronomics are so far off the pace.
Eventually it does catch up with them. I mean, it's 93% of yield, whereas Laureate's 104. We've already talked about 107s. When you get to that difference, it really starts to make an impact. Okay, so now we're into Laureate, fully approved brewing and distilling variety. This variety is now massive in the UK. It's the biggest variety in the market. To give you an idea of the scale of it, this last spring it was 50% of the seed certified in Scotland. It was about 24% in England, and from a barley purchase point of view, last harvest it was 62% of the barley purchase in Scotland and 38% in England. So the biggest variety in both countries. So it really is a massive variety. It's been a game changer on farm. David, you've been looking after a lot of it this year.
Yeah, it's this last 2 or 3 years, just as Paul says, increased in popularity, and it is our main variety. We've got to be careful with it, I think, from an agronomic point of view. Not going to talk too much about agronomics in here, but it is, although it's quite a good stand power, it's quite a thin straw, and we've just got to manage it on the PGR side and all that. So we've got to be careful with it. But certainly growers who have been on it have been very happy with it. The whole season, as you'll maybe see, and it's shown now, the unevenness in the whole barley crop this year, down a little bit, down to just obviously the climate we've had this year, with the sort of the drilling into probably not the best seed beds we've ever had, and then continuing on for that really intense dry period through April and May. So we had a lot of uneven emergence, uneven tillering, and you can see here now there's still that unevenness in it, and that's not varietal, that's just the crop, that's the season. So we've got to be, we are going to be very conscious about harvest management, and being asked a lot of times at the minute, what's the yield going to be like? We're seeing the winter barley's coming in. Initially now, yield is down, and without being the prophet of doom, I can't see that being any different in the spring barleys. And my usual sort of quote is, off this field we'll get 40 tonne of barley and we'll get a wagon load of grain. A wagon load of malt. We might just be struggling to do that this year on it all. Fingers crossed, there's decent grain sites in there, good grain fill, so hopefully we'll have some good spec weights, which we're seeing in the winter barleys as well. So yeah.
Okay, so now we're into LG Diablo. It's a fully approved distilling variety, but it is having a few hiccups getting over the line for approval for brewing. There's been further trials this year, and a decision was deferred at the Malt and Barley Committee meeting in May because there wasn't enough positive results to see over the line. So it's going to be reviewed again in November. And what was always thought to be a bit of a foregone conclusion is now starting to look a little bit iffy. It's not going to particularly impact on on the variety in Scotland, but it's always deemed it a bit of an advantage to have a dual-purpose variety that will fit.
Just gives that peace of mind, doesn't it, when you put it in the ground?
Yeah. So if it doesn't get the brewing and it does become exclusively distilling, I think that might knock the wind out its sails. On the distilling side, there was even one or two companies last year who were backing off Diablo a little bit, saying that they'd had issues the previous year with pre-germ. We've always quite liked it, and so far have not had any issues with it.
We had nothing last year. I think it harvested really well last year for the growers who had it. See again, nice big bold grain sample on it. It stood well. It's got a much thicker straw on it.
Agronomically, it's been great, and we we liked it since 2 or 3 years ago when we had it in here. So currently it's on about 10% market share in Scotland, slightly 11 or 12 in England, and a similar area gone in for next year. So again, it seems to have sort of levelled off like that, pending whether it gets this full approval for brewing. And the purchases so far have been quite low. It was only about 4% from harvest 2019, but it will be higher this year. So interesting to see which way this one goes. It hasn't quite flown overall the way that we thought it might. That doesn't mean to say that it's not going to be a decent variety for a few years for us. Now we're into SY Tungsten. This is another new variety. We did have it in the plots last year, so it's progressing at the same rate as the Firefoxx. It's potentially a brewing and distilling variety, and again it's right up there on yield. It's 107 in the north, which is the same as the Firefoxx, Diablo and the Splendor. So this one's looking worthy of further investigation. We have got approximately 800 to 1,000 tonnes coming in this harvest for malting and distilling scale trials. And there's a seed area gone in the ground in Scotland of about 6.5% in its first year, so there is a bit of industry interest in this one. The malt quality has looked, and the distilling quality has looked pretty decent so far on what we've seen, but obviously we'll have to expand that out into the wider trials to assess it further. But you've quite liked what you've seen in the field of it so far, David?
Yeah, I'm looking after a commercial crop of it, and obviously 2 or 3 varieties, quite a big farm where he's got 2 or 3 varieties in there. And the Tungsten, I think one thing we've noticed about it is it's got a lot of vigour. It does seem to have really coped with the conditions well, and you can see that in the crop here. It does seem quite well tilled and thick.
Yeah. Well, it'd be good to have an early assessment of it and look to expand it going forward for next year, because there is an absolute massive amount of new distilling material. Okay, so we've got 4 new varieties in the trials this year, but we're just going to focus here on one because the other 3 really aren't going to have any impact on the distilling industry. There's Skyway, which is a brewing only variety, which is progressing. There's Caithness and SY Emerson, which are unfortunately in micro malt trials haven't come up with PSY and hot water extract higher than the control, so they've both been jettisoned. So the only one that's left standing really is the new one from Syngenta called SY Fable, which is what we're in here now. It's a candidate variety just coming out of NL2, so it's up for recommendation to the recommended list this year. This one's shown a bit of promise in micro malt trials so far, with some pretty decent PSY. It's got a spec weight somewhat similar to Laureate. If there's a concern I would have over this one, the way the system works, we really need varieties to get onto the recommended list for them to progress through the malting barley evaluation system. And I would say at the moment this is looking like it's got a yield somewhat similar to Laureate, which, as you know from what we've been talking about in the other varieties, is probably just a little bit below the best of the rest. So is this going to have enough yield to get recommended? I don't know. We'll have to see how it performs this year. It's a Laureate cross. It's crossed with Deveron plus Laureate. Deveron was a Lima grade variety a few years ago that didn't quite make it, and it's certainly the only one coming along behind Tungsten and Firefoxx at the moment that looks like it's probably worthy of further investigation. So from a trialling perspective for this year, it's Tungsten and Firefoxx to further evaluate on a macro scale basis, and keep a watching eye on SY Fable.